Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable, carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thank you for joining the conversation today. As food systems face growing pressures to address their climate impact, waste, and supply chain disruptions, a new generation of entrepreneurs is rethinking not just what we eat, but how we make it and what we make it from. What if the ingredients that we throw away every day could become the building blocks of a more sustainable food future? That's the bold vision behind B-Sides, a Brooklyn-based snack company founded by Yousuf Ahmed, a former finance and music industry professional turned food innovator. He was inspired by a single slice of spent grain bread in 2014, and after that, Yousuf launched B-Sides to bring delicious, upcycled plant-based snacks to the mainstream. He's starting with Crunch Puffs, a savory puff made from oat pulp discarded in the oat milk making process. In other words, he's turning what we call waste into a valuable material and a tasty treat. Crunch Puffs are allergen friendly, protein rich, and packaged in compostable packaging. But behind this simple snack is the product of a complex vision that fuses supply chain resilience, circular economy thinking, and flavor forward food design. B-Sides sources pulp from small oat milk makers across the Midwest to produce the snacks in Canada and sell them online and in New York independent groceries. B-Sides is building a playbook for how small brands can lead on climate and creativity. So today we're going to talk with Yousuf about building a startup rooted in food waste, what big food can learn from small experiments, and how B-Sides is carving out space for flavor and sustainability in every crunchy bite. You can learn more about B-Sides at enjoybsides.com. That's all one word, no space, no dash, enjoybsides.com. So we're going to get to the conversation right after this quick commercial break. Stay tuned. Welcome to the show, Yousuf. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
First, start off by talking a little about B-Sides Crunch Puffs. What used to happen to the oat milk pulp that you're using?
So typically what happens with kind of any manufactured byproduct from food is it gets thrown out. It's the co-manufacturers, they wrap the excess in these giant plastic bags, and on a daily basis they get moved to whatever municipality dump is within reach, which is crazy if you think about it.
They weren't even feeding this to cattle. They just threw this away.
Yeah, so that's you raise an interesting point. Sometimes it gets routed to cattle. I think taking a step back,
Mm-hmm.
when you process something like oat milk, you're basically blending a bunch of raw oats with heated water and then straining out the pulp. So you have a temperature and time component that, from a food safety perspective, like it's a ticking time bomb, right? You don't have a
Right.
whole lot of time to do what you got to do, and so you don't really want to be sending livestock rotting food, although that does happen. And the other thing to keep in mind is livestock. So cows in particular, they're ruminants. They're intended to eat grass, not grains. So when you feed them things like spent grain from brewing beer or spent oats from making oat milk, they'll eat it. Like if you feed a diabetic kid a donut, the kid's going to go to town on the donut. But there are a lot of digestive issues that actually contribute negatively to things like methane emissions, carbon emissions, et cetera. So yes, part of them would go to livestock. It's not efficient, and it's certainly not the best route for those oats to take.
Well, you just hit on a number of things. The fact that we're using a material that otherwise would have gone to landfill, that would have produced methane and so forth. How's this changed the sustainability of a snack like Crunch Puffs?
Yeah, so the tricky part about like trying to calculate what is the exact impact of using whatever 10%, 15%, 50% of an ingredient like upcycled oat milk flour in a snack is there are kind of two ways that you can measure the impact. One is because you don't have to then go and plant additional oats and then harvest those oats. They're like downstream effects.
Right.
You get kind of it's tough to calculate what those would be because it's a crop that wasn't actually grown. On the flip side, the way that we've been tracking kind of the impact metrics are with regards to just the raw material itself. Instead of going to a landfill, you're averting those CO2 emissions. And instead of so there's like water involved with taking it apart, transitioning it into a shelf-stable ingredient, and then transporting it to where it needs to go. So we use the metrics around how much water was saved there and the CO2 emissions that would have happened if it broken down in a landfill. So just to give you kind of back of the envelope math, one case of any flavor of my Crunch Puffs avoids a half a pound of nutrition waste, avoids 2 pounds of carbon dioxide emissions, and 75 gallons of water gets saved. And that's just from using the upcycled oat milk pulp alone.
That's a real impact. I'm impressed. Working with something like oat milk pulp, had anybody done this before? And how did you overcome the challenge of turning this into the particular texture and taste that you were trying to achieve?
Yeah, so that's a loaded question. I'll take the second part first because it's a little clearer, and it actually answers your first question. So the short answer is yes. A lot of people have been working in the space that I'm in, so upcycling,
Mhm.
taking the byproducts from manufacturing food and putting them back into the food system. There are a couple of companies that have raised a couple of $1 million to get really good at the upcycling component. And that's everything from establishing where we call it product valorization. So the byproduct, using that as kind of adding value to it. That's been done in the beer and distilling space. It's been
Mhm.
done with alternative milk, so oat milk. And it's also been done in the production of kind of tofu, so soy okara. So everywhere throughout the food system, somebody has tried to tinker with what do we do with this byproduct. And to answer your second question, I think one of the reasons that upcycling hasn't really broken into the mainstream is the product, like the consumer facing products are just frankly not that good. So I knew when I went into this space, I wanted to put texture and flavor first and have that be the thing that drives the product rather than just selling based on impact. So directly answering your question, I went through hundreds of formulations before I got to the point where I was like, this is like this blend of upcycled oat milk, upcycled corn flour, and pea protein. This is how we do it.
So, what's the nutritional profile of Crunch Puffs?
Yeah, so it's super high in protein. We've got basically in a 28 gram or 1 ounce serving, you've got 5 grams of complete plant-based protein. The way that I've formulated these crunch puffs, basically you've got half the fat of Cheetos and everything you're avoiding any kind of the whole thing is plant-based, so the topical ingredient itself, while I have a cheddar flavor, there's no actual dairy in the cheddar.
Mhm.
The quote unquote technology around seasoning and vegan seasoning in particular has gotten really, really good. And I think broadly is overlooked because a lot of people associate kind of plant-based foods with having no flavor or like it being a cheap facsimile of the actual product. So the macros are all quite positive, particularly when looking at something like a Cheeto.
Well, I have to say that's one of the reactions I've had to most upcycled foods I've tried, which is it's kind of utterly bland.
Yeah.
Yours weren't. How are you flavoring it? Are you also using sustainable sourcing to flavor the Crunch Puffs?
Yeah, so sustainability, I think just taking a step back, that term catches a lot of different meanings, and depending on who you talk to, some aspects are more important than others.
Absolutely.
For me, just going down the line of what does sustainability mean from a food system perspective, I
Mhm.
think going directly at the source of like, can we make these products using plants alone? Is That was kind of my North Star when trying to go for sourcing because introducing things like milk and dairy and artificial food colorings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you can make great products and you can make them cheaply. But like in terms of sustainability, you're not growing yeast extract, right? Like if you're harvesting dairy and then processing it, you actually have to treat the livestock. There's got to be land for them to ruminate. There's a whole kind of supply chain around that versus growing the yeast extract in a lab, which to a consumer sounds like not that interesting or not that delicious. But the reality is we've actually been doing this as humans for a really long time. Yeast extract is the primary umami kind of component in the topical seasoning. And that's something as simple as harnessing things like the natural occurring glutamates from something like kelp or seaweed. And that's how you get that dairy cheese kind of hit without actually using the dairy. So, sustainability in the supply chain, it's plant-based first. And that's kind of the approach that I took, but you could take any number of attacks on that.
Well, I think you raise a really important point, which is everybody has their own definition of sustainability. In a sense, you are part of a circular economy too. You're recovering a material from another production process and using it. How do you think about growing the company, B-Sides, in an environment where there are so many new potential connections to be made within various circular supply chains that you might be able to leverage in order to find another base material for making another product?
I am a pragmatic realist when it comes to sustainability. I think a lot of companies that are mission driven, they drink a little bit too much of their own Kool-Aid and they end up getting the unit economics wrong, so they can't scale and they'll collapse under the weight of just business reality. So
Mhm.
for me, it was really focusing on, okay, these are the byproducts that are kind of readily available. I know how to work with them. It's an easier story to tell. Everybody kind of understands what oat milk is and that it had to have come from somewhere. But to your point about like there are tons of holes in the food production supply chain, whether it's the grains from brewing beer or the juice pulp from, juiceries or
Mhm.
coffee grounds, that there are companies that are trying to work on those problems and come up with the raw materials to work with. And I have partnerships with a lot of those companies and we've done a lot of R&D, but for me, it's kind of, let's put one foot in front of the other. I've got this product line that tastes good, is good, hits all the impact metrics I want to. And let's see if I can kind of find product market fit before saying, let's expand across every kind of supply chain hole that there is. Because if I can't prove out the business case, I can't do any of the sustainability impact metrics that are really important to me.
Well, you've just demonstrated your background in finance, but you also were working in the music industry before this. How did the combination of those two experiences influence your thinking about B-Sides?
Yeah, so I come from an unconventional background to be sure, but I think one of the one of the positives that it affords me is the ability to kind of look at an industry with a fresh set of eyes, a new perspective. So look, the music business, I had a knack for translating very complicated, complex, just mind-numbing financial data to people who did not have a financial background in a way that was compelling and kind of understandable and easily digestible. So I worked with musicians, both on the personal and professional side, managing their finances. So that could be anything from paying their mortgage or their insurance to reconciling a world tour that they went on and making sure all the dollars and cents were accounted for. I then took that experience and moved over to Goldman Sachs. I was a private banker. So I kind of did what I did in the music business, but for entrepreneurs on the investment side. So in private banking, especially at Goldman Sachs, to become a Goldman Sachs client, you've got to have $10 million or more of investable assets. And that's a very small kind of subset of the American economy. But in order to hit that threshold, basically it was all entrepreneurs or venture capitalists or hedge fund principals who had built and grown a business and then sold it.
Yeah.
That's how you end up with 10 million bucks or more, right? So taking the skill set of complex financial numbers and distilling it to this is how you approach it from an investment side. I took all of that and was able to build a book of business at Goldman dealing with entrepreneurs in the sustainability space, right? So this is 2015 to 2020. A lot of venture capital money is going towards sustainable efforts. Some of them are great. Some of them are just kind of rubber stamping sustainability on everything. I wanted to start B-Sides by saying like, look, I think there's an actual impact problem that I can line up the unit economics behind, and we achieve everything, a profitable business and the impact metrics that everybody's looking for.
I talk with a lot of people who are in the circular economy. What was it that spurred the realization that oat pulp and cornmeal left over from another production process was the basis of your next business?
Outside of just those two ingredients by themselves, I back in 2014, there's a chef named Dan Barber who has done a lot of work, both in upcycling, but just kind of within food waste from a restaurant perspective. He released a documentary called Wasted that sheds a light on a lot of the food inefficiencies from a waste perspective that the like the American food consumer world has just ignored. And he chose to highlight this in a dinner that it was a basically 30 nights. So over the course of a month, he had a new chef come every night and they would do a tasting menu where every course was born out of sustainability. So it was offcuts of not just meats, but also vegetables. And one of the courses in that meal was spent grain bread. So it was bread baked with the leftover grains from brewing beer. And, again, this is 11 years ago. I had never heard of this before. I thought this is such a simple, beautiful, delicious, circular idea. This should be everywhere. I don't understand why it's not everywhere. And so, for me, that's kind of where the kernel was born. And I watched and I waited over the course of a decade to see, is somebody taking this on? Like, why hasn't this become a thing? And, after a number of years and just not seeing it reach escape velocity or kind of proliferation throughout the consumer food discussion, that's where I decided I wanted to plant my flag. I thought there's got to be a way to do this. I want to plant my flag here. There's so many examples that as we've kind of touched on earlier, throughout the supply chain where you can make an impact across multiple product categories.
It's impressive you didn't just dive in and make a bunch of mistakes, which is also how most companies either end up succeeding or going completely bust. One of the most impressive things is that you have a 100% home compostable package. How did you achieve a moisture seal in a compostable product like this?
Yeah. So first, Mitch, you're giving me way too much credit. I have pivoted and failed multiple times throughout this
Okay,
process.
so this is an overnight success born of years
Yeah.
of, okay.
Yeah, a
Thank you for
decade,
being
a
honest.
decade of failures. Yeah. So yeah, no, I look, there are many times, many product categories that just like didn't achieve liftoff. And to your point about the home compostable packaging, I figured, look, what's the point of kind of creating a sustainable product if you then wrap it in plastic packaging? And to your point about the home compostable, how do you create a moisture barrier? So technology has gotten really, really good to the point where things like cornstarch can create, it's not quite a PLA seal because polylactic acid, I won't go into the science of it, but essentially that is a material that you can create compostable packaging, but predominantly industrial compostable. It has
Right.
now gotten to the point where you can create home compostable seals using PLA equivalents that break down in more kind of natural environments. The problem, and it's interesting that you bring this up because I'm now running to this issue where it's great that this is a home compostable package. The problem is it'll start composting on the shelf, right? If you sit on product for too long. And
Wh-
so trying to get
That's
that
quite a
right,
problem. I mean,
it's a huge problem.
what's the life
So
cycle of your product?
yeah, so essentially a year. And that sounds like a long time, but if you think about what a lot of consumers don't see is you've got to start procurement, shipping, packaging, and then shipping on the back end, and then it goes kind of to a warehouse where it sits, and then you start fulfilling orders. You could
Mhm.
use up, of that 12 months, 3 to 4 months just getting the product to the warehouse, right? So then you've
Right.
got 8 months to move all the product before it starts composting. So I'm running into this issue of how do I scale this thing profitably without having product? Because nobody wants to buy a bag of puffs that has started to compost, right? Like, and the point that I keep bringing up is, what the least sustainable company is, Mitch? Like just industry agnostic. If I had to ask you that question, what would you say?
The least sustainable company, not counting fossil fuels?
And it could be a fossil fuel company as well.
I would say Shell.
Okay. The argument that I would make is the least sustainable company is one that's not profitable because you can't achieve any of the impact metrics if you go out of business before you do it. So
Nice jujitsu move on the use of the word sustainable, but absolutely, yes.
yeah, yeah. Look, 100%. I'm, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a pragmatic realist about this, right? Packaging is something that I have wrestled with on how to capitalize on this, what to do about it. There's actually a company called Repurpose Global, where what they do is they kind of account for every pound of plastic in your supply chain, and they go into high impact areas like China, Southeast Asia, and when you partner with Repurpose Global, they take part of your grant money and they deploy it into plastic, taking plastic out of the environment. And it can be commensurate with how much plastic you use throughout the supply chain. There are different kind of metrics you can use to estimate it. The whole reason I'm bringing this up is like, look, it's going to be really difficult to get home compostable packaging to a mass audience, a mass market, if my product starts to degrade on shelf before I can even get it to a Target or a Whole Foods, right?
Hmm.
And so trying to strike a balance between how do I maintain this, ethos of sustainability if I have to use something like plastic packaging or a plastic kind of corollary and
Hmm.
repurpose, and what they're doing with kind of capturing plastic out of the environment, I think is a really good balance between the two. So like, yes, at this launch small scale kind of emerging stage that I'm at, home compostable is fine. But as I move to scale nationally, I've got to figure out a pragmatic way to do it.
At this moment, on this fulcrum of success or failure, great place to take a break. We'll be right back to talk more with Yousuf. Now let's return to the discussion with Yousuf Ahmed. He is the founder of B-Sides, a maker of upcycled Crunch Puff snacks. Yousuf, you were just speaking to the question of how do you reach a national audience? Is this going to be primarily a direct-to-consumer business, or do you see yourself being at retail everywhere?
All of the above. I
Okay.
think for any kind of food, especially emerging food brands in the consumer space, to quote unquote make it, you have to have some kind of retail presence or retail strategy. Otherwise, like the numbers just don't work. The problem with doing that though is retail is so stacked against emerging brands that it's really, really difficult to do it unless you raise a ton of money. So the way that I've thought about my go-to-market strategy is okay, how do I approach retail thoughtfully enough that I can get kind of the velocity metrics, which are number of SKUs sold per week, and hit the escape velocity to get to a mass market kind of national distribution footprint without going out of business. And the way that I've launched this product, I'm calling this kind of a soft launch phase. Basically, in January, I spun up a direct-to-consumer e-commerce presence where you can go to the website and buy. I'm on Amazon.com. You got to be like where consumers are, right? And then in parallel to that, I did a limited retail footprint here in New York City. I'm in 25 different kind of grocery retailers, but wholesale buyers, so Shopee shops all around the country, they can find me on Faire.com, on airgoods.com, on podfoods.com. The trick to winning in retail is you have to get every single aspect right before you get on the shelf, because you can't just start playing jazz with things like packaging or positioning. Like retailers don't like that, distributors don't like that. So right now this whole phase is what's actually resonating with consumers. What do they like? What do they not like? What do they open their wallets for? So I'm running different ad strategies to try to figure out what messaging resonates best. And then I want to get a track record of buy-in from the audience. What flavors do they want? What's selling well, what's not selling well. And then I can take that data and go to a meeting with a retail buyer and say, hey, look, I've already got the data. This is the kind of consumer who wants to buy this product. Here's the price point that they're buying it at. If you're interested, like we can have a conversation, versus me going to a retailer as an emerging brand with kind of no leverage in the negotiation and having to just adhere to every single demand that they make, because that's how you go out of business.
Well, the other challenge is once you get on the shelf, what's the messaging to the consumer? I don't think the first thing people think of is, I'm looking for a responsible snack. How do you pitch
Exactly.
to the person who does encounter Crunch Puffs at retail?
Going back to the top of the conversation where we discussed how the oat milk pulp, the leftover corn flour from milling corn grits, what is the best way to use that in a product that tastes good and has great texture? When people go to buy snacks, they want flavor first, then nutrition, and then they care about everything else, right? Everything else is a nice to have. And so if you nail the flavor and the texture, and you get the packaging right where it looks like a very intriguing snack. So I'll flip over the packaging and look at the back of pack and check out all the nutrition and all of those kind of nutritional aspects, check all the boxes that the consumer is looking for, and then the price point's good. Everything else falls into line behind that. So to your point about, people aren't going down the snack aisle saying how sustainable is my snack buff. The way that I approach sustainability is like you have to sell the product, right? Like the people have to want the product. And then if you've implemented a sustainable mindset properly, then that, in my opinion, should be kind of invisible to the consumer. There are consumers who care about it. It does drive velocity, not the velocity metrics necessary to win. And so, if you think about selling sustainability, if I achieve all the impact metrics that I want without actually having hit the consumer over the head with this is what we're doing, then didn't I achieve the same outcome, right? That's how I'm approaching it.
A lot of us think you have to wear this on your sleeve. And what you
Yeah.
really have to do is cater to the not the values necessarily of the consumer, but of their taste. What's the initial response from consumers when they find out that it's upcycled? Do they understand the idea? Does that increase their sense that this is the right product for them?
Yeah, excellent question. So most consumers, if you ask them on the spot, you have them try a Crunch Puff, they eat it, and then you tell them, can you believe this is made from the leftover oats from making oat milk? It Most of the time it's shock. They're A, they haven't thought about that problem, and B, they can't believe that something like a leftover byproduct can taste this good. And to your point about is this something that will make a consumer feel like this is the right snack for them? If you're catering to those top two attributes, flavor and then nutrition first, I tend to actually think that consumers are more forgiving or at least more kind of curious as to what else is in the product. And so it becomes a natural selling point of, oh, okay, I bought this because it looked interesting. It tastes good. It doesn't break the nutritional bank. Oh, and I have all these other, kind of sustainability attributes that I'm contributing positively towards. Like that's what gets them to buy the next snack. Maybe it didn't get them to buy it the first time, but you want them to come back and get it the second time.
In terms of B-side strategy, are you planning to be a net zero company? What kind of KPIs are you putting in place to ensure that the company reduces its overall impact in the long term?
Yeah, so from an impact metric perspective, yeah, look, certified B Corp, net zero. There are a lot of different ways you can plastic negative, plastic neutral. There are multiple kind of vectors of attack here. The thing that I want to prove first is that there is a consumer market for upcycled snacks. And whether or not that's hitting the consumer over the head with the fact that it is upcycled or not, once we can achieve kind of yes, there is a market for it. Yes, people pay a green premium for it. Then I'm going to solve for we're going to be net zero or net negative on emissions and plastic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things are important to me and they're important for the company roadmap. But right now, in this kind of time and place, I need to prove that consumers want a snack that tastes like this, looks like this, acts like this before I start solving for kind of the broader sustainability goals that I have in mind.
Just digging into those a little bit more, you're producing in Canada for largely a North American market, but primarily the United States. As you look at the configuration of your supply chain, are you already thinking about how to reduce the transportation time and distance?
Absolutely. So I am producing in Canada because, believe it or not, the Canadian government actually is quite favorable to circular economy projects and renewable, sustainable food efforts. So producing in Canada from an economics perspective, it was the only way to get this thing off the ground. I basically bootstrapped this company, right? Like it's very difficult to raise mission dollars from a venture capitalist in this day and age. And you kind of need the venture capital dollars to produce at the scale to do it in the United States. The minimums were an order of magnitude. To your point about reducing the footprint of where trucks have to travel, it's absolutely top of mind for me. I think, again, this comes back to this pragmatic realism of how to get a sustainable food company off the ground. There are manufacturing facilities that I've talked to throughout the United States. Ideally, you want to be making the food as close to where you're going to be selling the food. But in order to do that, and to your point about a North American market, I'm only selling in the United States right now. I only am an expert in kind of the US snacker. Snacking changes, like the cultural kind of identity around it. If you go across the border to Canada, down to Mexico, behaviors change. And so I need to kind of get it right on the US footprint first. But the short answer to your question is like, yes, I'm actively seeking partners who will help me produce this in the United States. It's just a way heavier lift for just economic reasons.
How did the tariffs change that calculus for you?
They didn't. So I guess I got very lucky in the sense that I kind of sniffed out that our fearless leader was going to be charging forth with these economic misadventures. So I bought as much product as possible before quote unquote Liberation Day and had it shipped across the border. And my hope was that either we would come to amicable resolution, or if not, I would have enough product to last me through when the devastation from the reality of implementing tariffs on our greatest trading partners were going to come to light and they were going to get resolved. The more coherent business answer is I started just moving the supply chain into Canada. So I'm not paying for raw materials to go across the border
You
and
don't want
then
to do
finished
that
product to
back
come
and forth.
back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
those round tripping kinds of charges are going to be the death of a lot of companies. As you think about the emerging challenges that thinking sustainably faces because of the rhetoric in our country right now, are we doing more harm every day by attacking these emerging industries? If you had a moment with the fearless leader, what would you tell them?
This is a fascinating question because there's a fundamental tension between the status quo, the way things are today, and where kind of people who think sustainably want the economy to go. And the idea that we're going to be digging something out of the ground and burning it to create energy indefinitely is kind of it's obvious on its face what the pitfalls of that approach is, right? But the problem is humanity, humans and consumers, like just down to the most granular level, that problem can become sort of nebulous in their day-to-day life. They've got to get from point A to point B, and the easiest, cheapest way to do it is using like a gas-powered car. And so having our fearless leader try to pick winners and losers in the economy, which by the way, what tariffs do, it's kind of a fool's errand because you're now getting to the point where he's going to sell access to the highest bidder.
Mhm.
And I would argue that's just like not a way to run economy broadly. And trying to then shoehorn this idea that we've got to have a broader foresight of investment on where we can make better choices. Like it's just not in his lexicon. So I don't actually think that's a productive conversation. One way that I would phrase it is, look, the rest of the world is moving on without us. And if we don't catch up, we're not going to be competitive. It doesn't matter if these things are produced, these things being anything, pick, an iPhone or a snack product. It doesn't matter if it's produced in, Missouri or Arkansas. No American consumer is going to pay for it.
Mhm.
So having these globalized supply chains, it's good business. Like he just accepted a $400 million plane, right? That was manufactured not here. And so trying to contextualize it as why don't we make this competitive from an American pragmatism standpoint? That's the way that I'd frame the conversation. It's just good business. We got to figure out how to solve this and place the bets so everybody wins.
I think you hit it on the head. Engineering advantage in a marketplace is counterproductive because the market is designed to undo advantage.
Precisely.
What advice would you offer to entrepreneurs who are considering launching food brands in the sustainable or upcycled or circular economy space? What should they be thinking about?
It depends on where they sit in that spectrum. So a food brand is so far ranging, right? You could go from producing raw materials all the way down to an end consumer product. The advice that I would give any entrepreneur is you got to figure out what the people want. And at the end of the day, the trickiest part about getting an upcycled snack food brand off the ground is consumers are just not familiar with upcycling. So using that as a selling point is a really, really tricky thing to do. Instead of doing that, why don't you figure out where there are gaps that a consumer wants that you can solve for outside of sustainability, and then try to figure out how to use sustainability as the method for achieving the solution that that consumer is looking for. The best way I can explain this is in my Crunch Puffs, the texture and the flavor. I can't make that texture or flavor without using upcycled ingredients. So it solves for everything at once. So don't do what I did, where you go and back solve for a supply chain problem. Go identify kind of that gap in the market first, and then formulate everything around that gap.
So, what materials, potentially upcycled materials, are you thinking about using to make your next snack?
So the the way that this mission all started was spent grain. So the leftover grains from brewing beer, distilling alcohol. That's what I've got my eye on next. I don't want to say too much because I'm running a lot of different kind of R&D trials, and spent grain is a very tricky animal to work with. A lot of people don't realize this, but when people think about beer, they think about salty, savory snacks that go along with the beer. To produce the beer, most of the time you use malted barley. Malted barley has a very distinct flavor that is excellent in confections, not so good in salty, savory snacks. So, how do you kind of bridge that gap, right? Because like people don't want to be thinking about a muffin when they're drinking a lager. And so that's kind of like the next Rubicon that I want to cross.
I can't wait to see how you cross that Rubicon. So, how can folks find and try B-Sides Crunch Puffs?
So you can find us on Instagram at Enjoy B-Sides. You can buy our products on the website. We ship nationwide to the lower 48, so enjoybsides.com. You can find us on amazon.com, on walmart.com. And if you're in New York City, DoorDash will deliver it directly to your apartment.
Hot damn. All right. Well, Yousuf, thanks so much for your time today. It really is an interesting conversation.
Thanks so much for having me, Mitch. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to a conversation with Yousuf Ahmed, founder of B-Sides and creator of the Upcycled Crunch Puffs line of snack products made from the byproducts of oat milk and corn grits production processes. You can find Crunch Puffs on Amazon and at select retailers. Learn more about the company at enjoybsides.com. Enjoy B-Sides is all one word, no space, no dash, enjoybsides.com. You know, we heard a pragmatic, realist perspective on sustainability, one that's important to keep in mind as the United States moves into an era of perhaps the final, but certainly more resistance to recognizing the continuing damage produced by runaway climate change. Sustainable products must taste good at a competitive price to win in this market. And too often, entrepreneurs, sustainability entrepreneurs in particular, embrace the idea that regardless of the downsides, committed environmentalists will embrace a product regardless of the flavor or price. That's the green premium we talk about so often. But real market winning products, the ones that can change the negative impacts of manufacturing while turning a profit capable of sustaining a company, can't compete based solely on a mandate to be sustainable, to tell consumers that they must be responsible, or, in the greenwashers' favorite term of art, eco friendly. Yousuf followed the hard path toward success. Budding entrepreneurs should take note of B-Side's determined testing, first of the product, then of the packaging, and finally the supply chain necessary to move a product that's better for the planet to market. And in this case, in time to prevent the compostable packaging from breaking down. But that compostable packaging is a significant improvement. It's something that if we can figure out a logistics system to manage all these materials, can reduce our overall impact. A sustainable economy must be built from the ground up because the existing approach was erected on extractive, wasteful processes whose time has passed. They don't work anymore. And as Yousuf said, you must start by finding the gap in the market that you can address, then reverse engineer it to deliver the better alternative sustainably, both financially and in terms of the product's environmental impact. Finding product market fit for a snack food is a matter of taste, price, and only then selling based on sustainability features. If your plan is to respond to customers that the product doesn't taste as good or is more expensive because it's better for the planet, you probably need to go back to the drawing board and start over because there simply aren't enough consumers out there who are going to pay that premium in order to have the option available. But we are seeing more products that have moved past the responsible snacking phase of the market, and we're going to continue to talk to and learn from innovators leading that charge. So stay tuned, folks. And I hope you also take a moment to check out one of the more than 500 episodes of Sustainability in Your Ear that we've produced. Writing a review on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us. You folks are the amplifiers who can spread more ideas to create less waste. So please tell your friends, family, and coworkers that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or whatever purveyor of podcast goodness they prefer. Thank you for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.